Hi everyone. Help me reach 1,000 subs. Once we hit this goal, I promise to upload stories more regularly and bring you even more meaningful and exciting content. Thank you so much for your support. Summer in Chicago is always hot and humid, with occasional refreshing breezes blowing in from Lake Michigan. My studio apartment is in an old building in Lincoln Park. I love its large windows, where I can look down at the tree-lined street, a peaceful pause amidst the city's hustle and bustle. Soft jazz music played from my Bluetooth speaker, filling my small studio with a relaxing vibe. The evening sunlight streamed through the big windows, casting a warm glow on the hydrangeas blooming on the windowsill. I carefully watered them, savoring the precious quiet of this Sunday afternoon. Chicago summers are stifling, both hot and humid, but I always cherish this time in my little apartment. Suddenly, the chime of a text message broke the silence. I set down the watering can and picked up my phone. It was Caleb. "Auntie, can I come over tonight to watch the NBA Finals at your place? I heard the Bulls have a real shot." I laughed. Caleb, my sports-loving nephew, was always full of energy and passion for basketball. On weekends, he often came over to hang out, watch sports, eat, and chat endlessly. I quickly replied, "Sure. I'll get pizza and wings ready. See you tonight." Hanging up, I began tidying up the apartment and prepping food. The thought of Caleb coming over filled me with joy and anticipation. Moments like these always made my weekend special. Right on time, the doorbell rang. I stepped out to greet Caleb with a beaming smile. He looked taller and more grown-up than the last time I saw him. Dressed in his usual Bulls jersey and a backward cap, he exuded youthful energy and confidence. We quickly settled on the couch, eagerly watching the game. Caleb passionately commented on every play, analyzing strategies with enthusiasm. Occasionally, I threw in a few naive questions just to make him laugh and explain further. The cheers from the TV, the rhythmic bounce of the ball on the court, and Caleb's excitement made the atmosphere in the apartment livelier than ever. I wore a light gray tank top and comfy denim shorts to combat the oppressive summer heat. While reaching for a soda can on the coffee table, my hand accidentally brushed against Caleb's. A strange sensation, like a light electric shock, ran down my spine. I froze momentarily and glanced at Caleb. His eyes met mine, unusually focused. It wasn't the carefree, cheerful look I was used to. My heart beat a little faster. I quickly pulled my hand back, trying to stay composed, convincing myself I was overthinking. I forced a faint smile, distracting myself by focusing intently on the game, hoping the odd feeling would soon pass. After the game ended, Caleb offered to help me clean up. Together, we picked up empty pizza boxes and scattered soda cans. As I bent down to retrieve a tablecloth that had fallen under the sofa, Caleb leaned down at the same time. Our faces were suddenly close, and his warm breath lightly grazed my cheek. My heart pounded harder and faster than normal. At that moment, the strap of my tank top slipped slightly, revealing part of my chest. Startled, I hurriedly adjusted the strap, overwhelmed with embarrassment and discomfort. My face burned, as though I had been caught doing something wrong. I stole a glance at Caleb and noticed his face was flushed as well. His eyes lingered, and I didn't need to ask where they had stopped. The room fell into an awkward silence, the kind that was almost unbearable. Neither of us dared to look directly at the other. I tried to break the tension by changing the subject to the game, but my voice was shaky, betraying the unease within me. Something had shifted between me and Caleb. It was a small, almost imperceptible change, but it lingered hauntingly. I couldn't quite put my finger on the feeling, only that it made me uncomfortable and unsteady. I wasn't sure what to do next, other than to avoid Caleb's gaze and hope he, too, would dismiss this as nothing more than an innocent mishap. But deep down, I knew things would never be as simple as they once were. Lou Mitchell's diner, with its classic charm, appeared before me like a familiar painting: worn red leather booths, a shiny long counter, and black and white photos on the walls telling stories of Chicago's past. Soft jazz music played from an old speaker in the corner, blending with the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversations, and the constant hum of the coffee machine. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a bright glow on the tables, creating a scene that was radiant yet steeped in nostalgia. Caleb and I sat across from each other in a quiet corner by the window, our usual spot for weekend brunches. These late-morning meetups had always been a time to talk freely about anything: sports, work, or the small stories that made up our week. But today, the atmosphere was different. There was a heaviness between us, something I couldn't ignore. After last night's incident, I felt uneasy, as though every glance or word might make things worse. Caleb, usually animated and talkative, seemed unusually quiet. He stared at the menu, but his eyes were distant, as though his thoughts were miles away. I tried to break the silence, asking about his plans for the upcoming week. Anything exciting coming up next week? My voice was light, but even I could hear the unease in my tone. Caleb looked up briefly, gave a vague reply, and quickly averted his gaze. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing moment. I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly, feeling increasingly unsettled. Something had changed, quietly but unmistakably, and I didn't know how to bring things back to the way they were. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I noticed Caleb picking at the crumbs on his plate. His restless movements, combined with the anxious look on his face, hinted that something was wrong. He took a deep breath, as though summoning all his courage. "Aunt Olivia, there's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while." My heart pounded in my chest. I had a sinking feeling that whatever Caleb was about to say wouldn't be easy to hear. I tried to remain calm, looking at him even though I felt a storm brewing inside me. "What is it, Caleb?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my effort to sound steady. Caleb stared down at the table for a few seconds, seemingly searching for the right words. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with worry, and something else, something deeper and more unsettling. I like you," he stammered, the words coming out haltingly, his voice shaky. "Not like family, but—" He trailed off, as though struggling to push the words out. Then, in a voice so soft I had to strain to hear, he finished. "I like you in a different way." I froze completely. Caleb's words hit me like a lightning bolt. The fork I had been holding slipped from my hand, clattering loudly against the table, drawing a few curious glances from nearby diners. But I didn't care. My mind was reeling, struggling to process what I had just heard. The look in Caleb's eyes wasn't like anything I had ever seen from him before. It wasn't the innocent admiration of a nephew for his aunt. There was longing in his gaze, a possessiveness, and something entirely unacceptable, something deeply wrong. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, as if it had closed up entirely. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to regain composure. Looking directly into Caleb's eyes, I spoke in a firm, serious tone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Caleb, what are you saying?" "You're my nephew. We're family." I began explaining, my words deliberate and heavy. I told him this couldn't happen, that our relationship was sacred, built on love and respect, not on feelings like the ones he described. I reminded him of the values our family held dear, the principles that could never be broken. Caleb sat silently, his eyes welling up with tears. Then, they spilled over, streaming down his cheeks. I know it's wrong," he said, his voice choking with sobs. "But I can't help it. I've tried so hard, but I can't stop thinking about you, especially after last night." His words felt like a dagger to my chest. Images of the previous night flashed through my mind, the strap of my tank top slipping, the way Caleb had looked at me then. Suddenly, everything made sense. A wave of disgust and fear swept over me, so overwhelming that it felt hard to breathe. I felt betrayed, as though the safe boundary between Caleb and me had been violated in the most unforgivable way. I couldn't stay there a second longer. I shot up from my seat, my hands trembling as I tossed some bills onto the table to cover the meal. Without looking at Caleb again, I turned and rushed out of the diner. Panic gripped me with every step, and only one thought filled my mind: I needed to get away from Caleb, from this awful feeling that was suffocating me. I didn't know what Caleb did after I left, and I didn't want to know. But the image of him sitting there, tears streaming down his face, stayed with me. It made me feel a confusing mix of pity, anger, and revulsion. The anxiety and fear that gripped me after Caleb's confession felt suffocating. I felt as though my sense of safety had been shattered, not just out in the world but even within the familiar walls of my home. My apartment, once a haven of comfort and peace, now seemed oppressive and alien. After that horrifying morning at the diner, I returned home feeling emotionally wrecked. The disgust and fear lingered, but what hurt even more was the disappointment. Caleb, my nephew whom I had cared for and loved like my own child, harbored such improper feelings. I kept questioning myself, wondering if I had done something wrong or missed any signs along the way. The constant buzzing of my phone dragged me out of my spiraling thoughts. Text messages and missed calls from Caleb flooded my screen. I picked up the phone, staring at his name flashing repeatedly. My emotions battled fiercely within me. I knew I shouldn't respond, but curiosity and concern made my fingers swipe to read one of the messages. Aunt Olivia, please let me explain. I know I was wrong, but I can't suppress these feelings. Please don't shut me out. I dropped the phone onto the table, my chest tightening with a mix of guilt and frustration. I sighed deeply, telling myself I needed to stay strong, but Caleb's words echoed in my mind, refusing to let me rest. Throughout the day, my phone continued to buzz. Caleb kept sending apologies, expressing his feelings, and, at times, lacing his messages with desperation that bordered on threatening. A few of his words made me shudder, as though they were veiled warnings. I tried to ignore the notifications, but each time my phone lit up, my anxiety grew heavier. Finally, I knew I had to take action. I opened my contact list, found Caleb's number, and pressed the block button. A confirmation prompt appeared, and I hesitated for a brief moment before completing the action. As his number was officially blocked, I wasn't sure if I felt relief or a deeper sense of guilt. But I knew I had no other choice. I needed to protect myself and reclaim the peace Caleb had inadvertently taken from me. Yet deep down, I couldn't erase the lingering sadness of having to sever ties with someone I had once cherished so deeply. A few days later, I tried to return to my normal routine. Work kept me busy and offered a temporary escape from the heavy feelings, but my thoughts continued to drift back to Caleb, his words, his actions, and the unnerving shift in our relationship. That evening, after a long day at work, I drove home. My mind was clouded with scattered thoughts about Caleb, until I noticed something unsettling. In my rearview mirror, a car was following me. I squinted, focusing on the headlights, and my heart dropped when I recognized Caleb's car. A chill ran down my spine. I pressed the gas pedal, attempting to create some distance and shake him off, but Caleb stayed close behind. My pulse raced as fear crept through my veins. Caleb sped up, pulling his car alongside mine. His window rolled down, and over the sound of the rushing wind, I heard him shouting, "Aunt Olivia! Please pull over. I need to talk to you." I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look at him. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my palms slick with sweat. I didn't respond. I just drove faster, silently praying he would give up. When I finally reached my apartment complex, I hastily pulled into the garage, my heart pounding so hard it felt as though it might burst. I locked my car doors immediately and rushed inside, securing every lock and drawing every curtain in the apartment. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, ready to call 911 if Caleb tried anything drastic. Peeking through the peephole, I saw his car parked outside. His silhouette was visible under the streetlight, standing still and eerily quiet. The fear inside me tightened its grip. I sat in the darkness, clutching my phone, my body trembling as I tried to convince myself that I was safe behind these walls. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small noise jolted me awake, my heart pounding as if on the brink of an attack. Around 2 a.m., a loud knocking at the door shattered the fragile silence, followed by the relentless ringing of the doorbell. I stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and tiptoed to the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Caleb standing there. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes wrinkled. His face was a mixture of desperation and exhaustion as he yelled my name and begged me to open the door. "Aunt Olivia! Please open the door! I'm begging you. I need to talk to you. I love you." His words pierced through me like a blade. I felt my whole body trembling, a mix of fear and disbelief washing over me. Clutching my phone tightly, I told myself I couldn't open the door. It would be too dangerous. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the courage to speak through the door, my voice quivering but firm. "Caleb, go home. Please, just go home." "No!" Caleb shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out." The banging on the door grew louder, his shouts more frantic. It felt as though all the air in the room had been sucked out, leaving me struggling to breathe. With no other options left, I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I pressed each number. "911, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was like a faint light in the midst of my panic. Please help me." I stammered, my voice shaky and broken. "There's someone at my door. He won't leave. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The operator asked for my address, assuring me to stay calm and stay inside. They promised the police would arrive shortly. I nodded instinctively, as if to reassure myself, even though no one could see me. As I hung up, Caleb's shouts continued outside, interspersed with the pounding on the door. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching my phone tightly, praying the police would arrive before the situation spiraled further out of control. The morning after that terrifying confrontation at my door, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own anymore. Caleb's actions were no longer something I could manage without help. Family intervention and professional support were now essential. With trembling hands, I dialed Sarah's number, my sister and Caleb's mother. Shame and guilt weighed heavily on me as the phone rang. When Sarah answered, I tried to steady my voice and recounted everything: Caleb's unsettling behavior at my apartment, his confession at the diner, the incessant texts and calls, and the horrifying showdown the night before. My voice cracked as I repeated Caleb's desperate and haunting words, and tears streamed down my face. There was silence on the other end. I could hear Sarah's deep, shaky breaths. "Olivia, are you serious?" Her voice was trembling, a mix of disbelief and pain. I knew this was a devastating revelation for her. Choking on my sobs, I stammered, "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm truly sorry. I never imagined it would come to this." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "All right, Olivia. I'm coming over. We need to talk face to face." There was a resoluteness in her voice, but also an unmistakable undercurrent of heartbreak and worry. When I hung up, I sat frozen in place, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions: fear, guilt, and the anxiety of how Sarah would react when she confronted this painful truth. Sarah arrived later that day with her husband, Mark. Their faces were tense, worry etched deeply into their expressions. After I recounted everything, from Caleb's troubling confession to the disturbing events outside my home, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. Finally, her voice broke as she said, "We need to help Caleb now. This can't go on." Mark nodded in agreement, and together, we decided to seek professional help. Sarah reached out to Dr. Emily Carter, a highly experienced family therapist. The first session took place in Dr. Carter's warm, inviting office. She listened to my story from start to finish, her demeanor calm and compassionate, asking gentle questions without interrupting. She explained that Caleb's feelings might stem from a complex mix of psychological factors. She emphasized that this wasn't my fault, that I wasn't to blame for what had happened. Her words lifted a small part of the weight off my shoulders, though I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. A few days later, we had a family therapy session with Caleb. When he entered the room, he looked exhausted and filled with regret, his head bowed as he avoided eye contact with anyone. Dr. Carter gently encouraged Caleb to open up about his feelings. After a long silence, Caleb began to speak. He talked about his admiration for me, how he saw me as an ideal figure in his life. But over time, he said, those feelings had shifted into something else, something he couldn't control. Sarah's face turned red with anger and disappointment. Her voice trembled as she confronted Caleb, demanding to know how he could do something so hurtful to someone who had loved and cared for him like family. I watched Caleb as Sarah spoke, and a deep sadness filled me. Taking a steadying breath, I spoke to him directly, my voice calm but firm. Caleb, I've always cared for you as my nephew, as someone I love like family. But these feelings you've developed, they're wrong, and they're something we cannot accept. You need help to understand and overcome them. This isn't your fault, but you have to take responsibility for your actions. The session ended in heavy silence. Dr. Carter recommended that Caleb begin individual therapy to address the root of his emotions and behaviors. As we left the session, the weight of everything felt overwhelming, but I clung to a glimmer of hope. This was only the beginning of a long and painful journey, for Caleb, for me, and for our family, but at least we had taken the first step toward healing. As time passed after the family and individual therapy sessions, it seemed like things had finally settled. Yet, deep inside, the scars lingered, quiet and persistent. Though the haunting calls and unsettling words were no more, the memories of those days hung over me like a shadow, occasionally resurfacing to remind me of the pain. Following many tense therapy sessions and tearful conversations, Caleb agreed to move in with his father in a city several hours away from Chicago. It was a difficult decision, but everyone in the family believed it was the best thing for Caleb at that time. He needed a fresh environment, a new space where he could focus on healing his emotional wounds. I still remember the day Caleb left. I went to the airport to see him off. We didn't say much to each other, just exchanged awkward hugs and brief well wishes. Caleb's gaze was hard to decipher. It wasn't the longing I'd seen before, instead, it carried a deep sadness, regret, and perhaps a hint of something unspoken, like nostalgia for what could never be. After Caleb left, my life grew quieter. The intrusive texts and calls stopped, and there were no more late-night moments of being followed. But the silence carried its own weight, a sense of emptiness. I felt like I had lost a significant part of my life. Even though time has moved on, I can't forget what happened. Caleb's eyes, his confession, and the nights I spent paralyzed with fear, they remain as a scar etched into my mind, a constant reminder of what I endured. My relationship with Sarah also changed. Although she never blamed me, I could feel an awkwardness whenever we spoke. There was an invisible wall between us, a barrier built from pain and disappointment. I understood that Sarah was grappling with her own emotions, feeling heartbroken over her son and the fracture within our family. I threw myself into work and daily activities, trying to find some semblance of peace. But memories of Caleb continued to haunt me. At times, I wondered whether I had done the right thing. Could I forgive Caleb and myself? Those questions followed me, making true relief feel elusive. A year later, I received a card from Caleb. In it, he wrote that he was doing well in school and attending a support group. He apologized for everything that had happened and said he was working hard to become a better person. Reading those words, I felt a small sense of relief. I knew Caleb's journey would still be long and challenging, but at least he had started walking the right path. I don't know if we can ever rebuild our relationship the way it was before. Perhaps we never will. But I hope that one day, we can meet again and look at each other without shame or fear. I have also learned to accept what happened. It is a part of life, a piece of the past that cannot be changed. What matters most is that I move forward, learn to forgive, and seek peace within myself. That deep scar will forever be a part of my story, a reminder of the darkness that can arise, but also of the strength it takes to overcome and appreciate the good relationships that remain in life. Several years have passed since those tense and turbulent events. I've moved into a new apartment, leaving behind the dark memories tied to my old place. With a fresh start and a new job, I focused on rebuilding my life, centering on the present and embracing positivity. Caleb has changed too. After years of therapy, he has matured and learned to manage his emotions. He's now attending college in another state, far from family, embarking on a new chapter in his life. I relocated to a smaller apartment in a different part of Chicago. Though more modest than my previous home, this new space brings me a sense of safety and renewal. I changed my phone number and limited my connections with people who reminded me of the past. My work as a graphic designer has flourished. I've been entrusted with exciting projects and the chance to collaborate with talented individuals. I've poured my energy into work and personal hobbies, like painting and strolling through Lincoln Park. Even though time and distance have softened the pain, the memories occasionally resurface. All I can hope is that Caleb and I both continue moving forward, leaving behind the old wounds to find genuine peace. One day, I received a letter from another state. Recognizing the return address, I instantly knew it was from Caleb. My heart raced as I stared at the envelope. Taking a deep breath, I opened it. In the letter, Caleb wrote that he was now studying psychology in college. He shared how therapy had helped him better understand his emotions and learn to control them. He apologized once again for what had happened and thanked me for helping him confront his issues. He expressed hope that, one day, we could reconnect as family. Reading his words, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was clear that Caleb had truly changed and was striving to become a better person. A few years later, Sarah called me. She told me that Caleb would be coming home for Thanksgiving and wanted to see me. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready, but eventually, I agreed. On Thanksgiving Day, I went to my sister's house. Caleb was already there. He looked more mature, confident, and composed than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me, he smiled warmly and walked over to hug me. That hug no longer carried the weight of longing or obsession. It was a genuine embrace, a heartfelt gesture from a nephew to his aunt. We spent the evening having dinner together, talking about the past and sharing plans for the future. No one brought up the darker days, but I knew that both Caleb and I had forgiven each other. The evening ended with a sense of peace and hope. The deep scar of the past remains, but it has faded with time, making room for new, brighter memories and a renewed sense of optimism for the future. I've found peace within myself, and I believe Caleb has too. If my story has touched your heart and given you moments of reflection, please hit the subscribe button on my channel to join me for more meaningful stories. Don't forget to like and share this video to spread the message of forgiveness, hope, and the strength to overcome life's challenges. Thank you for being part of my journey, and I'll see you in the next video.